All right, welcome back to our daily Bible reading, and Blake is back with us. I think this week and next week,
This week and next week.
then your run is done. But we're glad that you've been here.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
And again, just continue reading through the Bible. Appreciate these times we can share together in these discussions. And so we'll pick up with August 17th through August 23rd, and we will be in. Finish up Nehemiah, just the last couple of chapters there, and then we're going to finish an entire Old Testament book this week. We're going to make it all the way through Esther, and then we're going to go back to or enter into a new section of the Old Testament, the wisdom literature with Job, and get through about 11 chapters of Job. And then in the New Testament, we're still in 1 Corinthians, and we'll do chapters 11 through 15. So, all right, Blake, well, let's finish up Nehemiah.
All right. Well, Nehemiah, they had finished the wall and they were dedicating it. And I think these verses they celebrated joyfully during the dedication, offered great sacrifices. End of verse 43 says, the sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away.
Yes, yep.
So they were enjoying that. First part of chapter 13, they are reading the law again.
Yep, Book of Moses being read out loud. Yeah.
Yes. And they, again, came across something they weren't doing.
Yep.
And so they excluded from Israel all of the foreign folks that were there. We get into verse 4, and it says, Eliashib, the priest, had allowed his friend Tobiah, who was the enemy in the previous section, to have a room in the temple and store some stuff. And then we find that during this time, Nehemiah had actually returned to Babylon, and he was gone for about 12 years. And
it wasn't that long. I didn't look up that time period. 12 years.
I think about 12 years, yes. Right. And then he returned to Jerusalem and found some backsliding had happened, and
some of the same things that got them into the situation when Babylon came and destroyed them. They're falling back into those types of behaviors.
Absolutely. So the first thing Nehemiah did was kick Tobiah out. Throw his stuff out.
It's really amazing. This is a guy that's been harassing them. And Sanballat also comes in later on.
He does.
Where they worm their way into Jerusalem here, and it's just amazing how these people who are opposing the rebuilding of the city, have somehow managed to ingratiate themselves to the residents there.
Yes, they did. Yeah. Yes, they did. Yeah. So he took care of that, and he also learned that the portions to the Levites were not being done as they were supposed to, and that the Levites and the musicians had gone back into their own fields.
Yeah, they weren't paying them.
Yep.
The money that was allocated for those services was not being given to those people.
Yep. So Nehemiah fixed that and started having the tithes brought again, and a place to put that, and they were messing with the Sabbath as well. There was stuff going on that shouldn't have been, selling stuff and selling food and all kinds of stuff. And so Nehemiah had to step in to that again, and then found out they were intermarrying amongst
as well.
The others again, and they quickly forget.
Yep.
Quickly forget, but I suppose that could be said of us as well.
Right.
So
we mentioned that last week. It's one thing to make those reforms. It's another thing to maintain that.
Absolutely.
And in sports, they talk about you winning a championship is one thing. Defending your championship is another.
Is a whole nother
And so
thing.
this is certainly a lesson with carrying through and making sure you have those guardrails or those disciplines in place where you can continue in that spiritual direction that we want to head in.
That's right.
Yeah, easy to slip back into bad behavior.
It is. I want to read verses 25. I thought that was kind of interesting. There in chapter 13, he says, I rebuked them and called curses down on them. I beat some of the men and pulled out their hair.
This guy's serious.
Yes, indeed. I made them take an oath in God's name and said, you are not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons or for yourselves. Mm-hmm. And then Nehemiah ends with his statement, remember me with favor, my God.
And he says that several times throughout these last
He
chapters.
does.
Remember me with favor. So Nehemiah is doing everything that he can to get these people on the right path, and I guess just wants God to remember him.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that wraps up Nehemiah, and
Yes.
so the people are settled there in Jerusalem, and they're going to be there for what we call the intertestamental period. They're going to be there, and a lot of things happen between this period and, of course, the coming of Christ, but they're there to stay, essentially. And there's going to be a lot of things happening. The intertestamental history is very, very interesting about the different groups of people that are vying for control of the Holy Land. They even gained some independence at one point. Hanukkah is the celebration of that independence that takes place during the intertestamental period. But the people are here. The temple is there, and Jerusalem is a functioning city and will continue to be one when we open up the opening chapters of Matthew.
That's right. Yes,
All right,
sir.
so moving into Esther, just a great book. If you're a member of Park Avenue, familiar with Christian Theater Workshop, then the story of Esther should be pretty familiar with you. And if you've seen A Time to Stand, which I've probably seen it 5 or 6 times, well, we've done that 5 or 6 times, repeated performances, so I must have seen it close to 20 times.
Absolutely.
And so as you're reading through Esther, you can't help but humming some of those songs
That's right.
as well.
That's right.
That's what Henry Ann said. You just can't read chapter 1 without singing that song. You got to get one better, or no one says no to a king, don't you know? And so this is a great story, and just plays out really as a as a drama that takes place with this Jewish woman and her cousin who they're still in exile. So here's what we're kind of shifting gears from what was going in Jerusalem back to the people in exile when Persia is the power. All right, Esther.
And this takes place really during Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7.
Okay.
The first remnant has already returned to Jerusalem. One thing I found, Esther is the only book of the Bible that does not mention the name of God.
The name of God, the covenant name of God is not mentioned. There's no mention of Jerusalem. There's no mention of any of the sacrifices or worship. And there's no mention of prayer. There's none of that.
There is none
in there. So there's, it's a interesting book because of those omissions. At the same time, as you read through the book of Esther, you can see the hand of God at work. There's no doubt that God is directing these affairs. There's no doubt that there's people of faith, Esther and Mordecai, of course, being the predominant characters in the book.
Right.
And so even without those, and there's no miraculous event that takes place.
There's not. That's true.
But I think you could say providence, and God is working through these two people to provide deliverance for the Jewish people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because of all that, we have the Feast of Purim. That continues.
Yeah.
Today?
Still to today. Yeah.
Yes.
About the Feast of Purim, what's interesting, and I've never participated in a feast, but I've read that on Purim, when this story is read to the Jewish audience, whenever Mordecai's name is mentioned, there's big cheers. And then whenever Haman's name is mentioned, there's boos or hissing. That would be a great experience to see this actually celebrated. And that interaction that takes place between the reader and the audience as well. So,
Absolutely.
So they really get into this. This is a great victory.
It is
Jewish
a great
people.
victory.
Yep.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Very good. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, and I certainly, in reading through it, you certainly see God's hand.
For sure.
God is certainly at work, staying faithful to his promise to take care of the Jewish people. And I think it gives us hope that even though we may not understand what's going on or can't see the big picture, we know God is at work.
Right.
God is certainly working.
And how he uses us, how he uses this woman for such a time as this. I mean, that's one of the key passages in this story. Yeah,
Yes.
and to see, maybe certainly in less dramatic ways, that God has put us in a certain position, a certain time, in a certain place.
That's right.
Where we live, where we work, where we play. And
Absolutely.
for such a time as this, God has placed us here to do his bidding.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, starting in chapter 1, we see that King Xerxes is the ruler.
And Ahasuerus, I think he sometimes, in some other translations, he's
I
referred
saw
to
that.
as Ahasuerus.
Yes, yes, he is. Well, evidently he's holding a big banquet and invites his queen, Vashti, to make an appearance
Oh, yeah.
in the royal garb to show her off. And she says no.
Yeah, she doesn't go for that, yeah.
She does not. Of course, that made the king very upset.
Yes.
But one of the interesting statements in verse 17, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come.
Right now, this is going to have a trickle-down effect, and now all of the wives are going to disobey their husbands,
They're all
and he doesn't want that to happen. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So she is removed from the palace. She's kicked out.
Yeah.
No longer to return. So in chapter 2, they have to search for a new queen.
Got to find a new queen.
That's right. So evidently, they brought in a lot of women for this task to see who the king would like. And Mordecai, as you stated earlier, was raising Esther as her parents had died. And Esther was part of this group of women and was taken to the king's palace. Mordecai, I found it interesting. Mordecai had instructed her not to reveal her nationality or family background.
Right.
And may have been some fear of not giving her a chance, or may have been some fear of backlash or something of that nature. But for whatever reason, Mordecai did that. And so Esther, of course, won the favor of the servants and of the all that met her. And the interesting verse, chapter 12. Verse 12. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women. 12 months, a year. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Looking good. I can't help but sing some of these songs, Blake. So forgive me.
That's right. Carry on. I love it. Absolutely. So anyway, Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her, including the king, and she was chosen as queen.
Yep.
So interesting story amongst all that. Mordecai was a gatekeeper for the king. He was at his post and overheard two of the king's officials conspiring to assassinate the king.
Right.
And he told Esther, and Esther told the king, giving Mordecai credit, which was important later on. And so the report was investigated, found to be true, and the officials were executed, and Mordecai had saved the king's life.
Yeah.
So, which was, again, God's hand and God's providence, because that was an event that came back into play later on.
Right time, right place.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of a theme for Esther. Right time, right place.
Very much of a theme. Very good. Yeah. Well, in chapter 3, we learn of Haman. Haman, the enemy of the Jews.
Yep.
He was actually, I guess, second in command at that time.
Very high official.
And then, of course, he got upset when Mordecai would not bow down to him.
Yep.
And then he planned to figure out how to destroy and kill and annihilate all of the Jews because of Mordecai. So, chapter 4, they learn of the plan, and they hear of what's going out to kill the Jews. And Mordecai asked Esther to go into the king's presence and plead with the king for her people.
Right.
And evidently that was not a an easy thing to do.
No, you would think, king and queen, they'd, just have some chats now and then, but apparently it was a little bit more formal than that. The
Yes.
queen just couldn't express her opinion whenever she wanted to.
Absolutely.
You had to have the royal scepter
Yes.
extended to you in order to
Yes.
approach the king. Yep.
Yes.
And
So-
she's reluctant.
Very
Yeah,
reluctant.
she's reluctant.
Yep.
Yeah.
In 14, she talks about that. But in 14 is Mordecai's response to her reservations, and awesome passage.
Yep.
For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Meaning, I think Mordecai had faith that God was going to keep his promise. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this.
Right.
Amen.
Yep.
Such a time as this.
Yep.
Yes, indeed. And then 15 and 16, Esther sent her reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish.
A great statement of faith right there. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Now, this is the mention of fasting, I think, is the only reference to any type of religious practice.
Yes.
And people would say, and I think this is certainly justifiable, is that fasting was almost always associated with prayer.
Yes.
And so even though prayer is not mentioned, I think it's implied in this, that this is a religious act that people are going to petition God for wisdom and guidance. And
I think that's right. Yep, I think that's right. Very good. So chapter 5 starts. Esther went in to see the king, and she was accepted by him. I think the king liked her quite a bit. So Esther asked the king to arrange a banquet for the king and Haman.
Yeah.
And Haman was pleased at that, but he walked by Mordecai again and got mad at Mordecai all over again.
So Haman doesn't know what's going on, and apparently he doesn't even know that Esther's Jewish at this point either. So he's being set up big time here.
He certainly is.
Yeah.
He certainly is.
But again, that animosity, hatred towards Mordecai is increased as Mordecai still just kind of doesn't give him the respect that Haman wants.
That's right. And so Haman just plans to have the king execute Mordecai, and that's his plan for the next day. But
Haman's wife's a winner here. She's encouraging that, Get rid of the guy,
Yes, she is. Most definitely. So then we move into chapter 6. Chapter 6 again shows God's hand. I wonder if sometimes that doesn't happen to me, where I can't sleep and then get up and read some scripture and some revelation, certainly. So he couldn't sleep, and he ordered the servant to read to him the chronicles, the record of his reign.
Right.
So read about all what I've done.
Let's catch up on recent history.
So that's when it was found recorded that Mordecai had saved the king previously. But he was not rewarded
what did we
for
do
his
for
actions.
this guy? We didn't do anything.
Yeah. So the king wanted to honor Mordecai. And I guess it was morning. Haman happened to show up at that time.
Oh, yeah. Haman's so excited because he's been invited to this banquet with the king and the queen. And so he thinks that he's going to receive some high honor at this point.
Absolutely, he does.
Why else would he be invited to this feast?
Right. And the king is still on the task of honoring Mordecai, and kind of asked Haman for his recommendation. Didn't tell him it was Mordecai.
No, Haman's thinking he's asking for himself.
Exactly.
How is the king going to honor me?
Yes. So Haman gives these grand suggestions because he thinks it's going to be him.
Yeah.
And so moving into chapter 7, Esther, going back, Haman did go through with the big celebration for Mordecai, taking him around town,
Yeah,
celebrating
really humbling
him.
experience.
Yes, and then he kind of slinked out of town back to his house.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then the next day shows up for...
Yeah, Esther had put off, she requested that
She did
banquet,
put
she
that
put that
off,
off
that's
for a
right.
day, and then,
Yep, that's right.
then extended it to a couple of days of celebration, wasn't it?
Yes.
I think it was a couple of
Yes.
days of banquet.
Yep, sure did.
Yeah.
And then finally the day came when Haman showed up for the banquet, and Esther revealed to the king Haman's plot to kill the Jews. The king was enraged, and Haman was put to death.
Yeah, on the very gallows or the spike or the pole, it seems like he was impaled,
Yes.
that he had prepared for Mordecai.
For Mordecai.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
So that's a twist in the story there.
It is. It
Yeah.
is very much so. And then chapter 8, Esther is given Haman's property, and
Yeah.
Mordecai's moved up to number 2 in command to the king. And
Yeah, yeah.
Esther, in reading this, I kind of got the impression that Esther had been a little emboldened by how it had gone before when she asked the king, and so I think she felt more comfortable this time in pleading with the king to stop the plan to destroy the Jews. And the king agreed and allowed Mordecai to send out the letters, and allowed the Jews to effectively defend themselves. And so verses 16 and 17, for the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. And 17 ends with, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, and then chapter 9 talks about the Jews destroying their enemies, a very large number,
Yeah, hundreds.
75,000.
Oh, thousands, okay.
75,000, yeah. Including the sons of Haman,
Yeah.
and they were put to death the same way. And so, anyway, verses 20 through 22, Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the province of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. The Feast of Purim.
Yep, still celebrated to the day. And Purim comes from that Hebrew Semitic word P-U-R, which means lot. And that's how all this started, when Haman cast a lot to determine which day he would set to extinguish the Jews.
Very good. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, verse 28 talks about every generation, by every family, in every province, and every city will celebrate.
Yep. Yeah.
So the days of Purim.
Yep. Yep.
Chapter 10, Mordecai, the Jew, is second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews.
Yep. Yep. And Mordecai becomes the number 2 guy.
He does. He
in,
does.
In all of Persia. Great story, and again,
Awesome
God
story.
working and reversing the plans of evil and actually benefiting the Jewish people. And so we get a little glimpse of life in the exile. Jewish
do.
people, they're faithful
We do.
people, still in Babylon, Persia, and God is working even in that area. So He's working in Jerusalem, working in the exile.
And exile.
as well.
Absolutely. That's right.
All right, so at the beginning, as I said, that kind of ends the historical section that we
Yes,
refer
it
to in
does.
the Old Testament. And now beginning with Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Now, of course, with Psalms and Proverbs, we've been reading those intermittently throughout these readings. And
We
so
have.
we'll skip through those. But Job begins this section called the wisdom literature, sometimes referred to as the books of poetry. I
Poetry.
prefer wisdom literature. Because I don't like poetry. But in these books, it just kind of, it's answering or addressing or contemplating some of the questions of life and evil and struggles and joy and all the different emotions that we experience, situations that we experience as human beings, and how we reconcile those with our belief and faith in God, and how do we just deal with that? And so these books of poetry are very emotional. They're full of wisdom.
Full of wisdom.
These books here are hard to read. Job is a hard book to read just because of all of the misfortune that befalls Job.
Yes.
But, really, I would say essential reading for everyone, whether you're a believer or not.
Yes.
I mean, just how do we deal with the problem of evil? How do we deal with injustice in the world? And how do we survive when difficult times befall us, which all of us have experienced this to some degree.
Right.
And so the story of Job.
Certainly, thankfully, I don't think most of us, not to the extent that Job.
Right.
I mean, because everything was taken from Job, and he was afflicted, and it's interesting, and I will second your encouragement there. Read the entire book. It is very, very emotional. It's difficult. There's difficult reading, but gives you an idea of kind of the thought processes back then, kind of the where they were with suffering. Certainly believing it's a penalty for sin.
Right.
And just a very interesting book. We get a little glimpse of Satan as well.
Yep.
Which is certainly another time for discussion, but very interesting.
Yeah, the reality of that other power.
That's right.
Lesser than God, but certainly powerful, and just how he wreaks havoc in our life.
Absolutely. The interaction between Job and his friends is really interesting. I'll read you one statement that kind of made me laugh when Job said it to them. That's pretty funny, but just in the midst of suffering. But chapter 1, verse 1 and 3, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright.
Yeah, great man. Yeah.
He feared God and shunned evil. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. That is impressive. That is impressive.
The time period here is disputed. We don't know exactly when this takes place.
Yes.
And a lot of people think it takes place during the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And it's either written by, some people think it was written by Moses.
That's right.
Of course, there's no identification of an author here. There's kind of a tradition, an ancient tradition. So some people think it was written later, and this oral tradition had been carried forth by the Jews and then eventually written down. But this is probably a pretty ancient story. So this is not in chronological order. So we're
absolutely,
we're kind of putting a pause on the chronology here and going back probably hundreds, thousands of years back to the
close to that time for sure. I think
that's what the prevailing theory seems to be.
I think that's right. Well, verse 6 and 7. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them.
Yeah.
So I'd like a little more information.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions here. Who invited him? Or does he just show up when he wants to? It introduces this power of evil
It does.
that exists.
Yes, it does.
That's out there, and there's lots of questions. Where did Satan come from? The origin, the amount of power that he has, and all those are very interesting questions to ponder and discuss. But I think it's just important for us to recognize that there is this evil force out there that
absolutely
is antagonistic towards God and antagonistic to people like Job who are fearing God and being blessed by God.
That's right. The Lord says to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it."
Yeah, scary thought.
That is, isn't it? Yes, indeed. We see this scenario play out again shortly. But, Satan accuses Job of only fearing God and shunning evil because God has built a hedge around him.
Who wouldn't love you if you blessed them like this?
Yes.
You know, his life is going perfect, and that's the introduction to Job. He's wealthy, he's got a great family, he's highly respected, and so
Yep.
you know, Satan's accusation is, well, yeah, of course.
Right,
Of course he honors you.
absolutely. So God allows Satan to take all of Job's possessions from him, including his children. You know,
And all of this, you know, God is allowing this, so God is the final word. Of course, we can question God why he did this, and this doesn't answer all of our questions.
it does not.
But a truth that we learn from this is Satan cannot do anything that the Lord does not permit.
Does not allow him.
Right.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly right. So all these things kind of happen one right after another
Yeah,
to,
bada bing, bada bang,
Job. And in 20 and 22, at this point, Job got up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship
Yeah.
and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.
Right.
In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So, extremely upright, ethical man. Chapter 2, the same thing happens again with Satan coming with the angels, and God says the same thing, where have you come from? And Satan answers, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. And I think that gives us a little bit of insight, because we're told that twice in a short period of time. Yeah. And like you said, evil is roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. So not just going through once, but continuing back and forth. It's a continual, constant thing. This time God allows Satan to afflict Job with painful sores. Verse 9, a lot of people will remember. Job's wife said to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die.
Right.
And his reply, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And again, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said.
Yeah.
Then Job's friends come to visit. And a very telling tale of Job's suffering, I think, is in verse 12 and 13. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep out loud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was.
Yeah.
They just sat there with him. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible. Yeah. Then we kind of get into the discourses. Job's discourse first, cursing the day he was born.
Yep.
Which, you know, he wishes he had died, regrets that he ever lived. Verse 26, I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, but only turmoil. Yeah. And so he was in a great deal of suffering. Yeah. Great deal of suffering. Yeah. And he didn't know that God had told Satan couldn't take his life.
Good point.
So he did not know that.
Yeah. Job doesn't know anything.
He doesn't.
About the backstory.
He knows nothing. That's right.
I mean, this
He
introduction, as far as we know, is, you know, Job doesn't know that he's been placed as a test case, more or less, by God.
Yes.
So he doesn't see what's going on behind the scenes.
He doesn't, and that's evident by his discourse and what he says for sure. Chapter 4 details Eliphaz's reply to Job, basically saying that only evil people suffer.
Yeah, and that was the prevailing theory, and still is today.
Yes, yeah. It is that. He talks about a dream he had that showed man's unholiness and mortality. Chapter 5 continues. These responses are pretty long.
Yeah.
And he basically says people bring trouble on themselves. Verse 8, but if I were you, I would appeal to God. I would lay my cause before him. So they were right in that regard. But verse 17, Eliphaz says, blessed is the one whom God corrects. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Going back to that idea that he's being disciplined because he did something wrong. Chapter 6 is Job's second speech, his reply to what Eliphaz had said. Verse 4. The arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me. Verse 11, what strength do I have that I should still hope? Yeah. One thing that kind of hit me at this point, I think, was I don't know that when bad things happen to me, I blame God. I think I blame Satan. And, you know, that Satan's kind of attacking me is kind of how I view it. But I think in this case, he attributed it to God. Yeah. Job attributed it to God.
Yeah. Or a response that you know, is commonly heard is, why would God allow this? We know that God has the power to do anything and to protect us from anything. And so the question is, why is God not intervening? Why isn't God acting? Why isn't God preventing this if he has that power? Right. And that's, you know, Job is just, he's confused.
Absolutely.
He just doesn't know what's going on. And he's, you know, I just wrote down a summary of that speech after Eliphaz. I just put, why me? Is what Job is basically saying. And that's a situation that a lot of us find ourselves in. You know, why me? Why is this happening to me? I don't understand. Yep. And so Job lives in this contradiction. You know, he's trying to do right, he's trying to do good, and these bad things happen. And he's pretty convinced that that's not the reason. He's pretty convinced that it's not because of his disobedience. Right. Now, I don't think Job would ever say that he's totally innocent, that he's never sinned, but Job doesn't think it's because he's done bad.
Because he's done, that's right. That's exactly right.
So, you know, what's going on? And so this just shows that sometimes we live in this confusion.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes we do.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. Verse 21 there of chapter 6, Job's response to his friends. Now you two have proved to be of no help. Yeah. You see something dreadful in our parade. Yeah. So...
yeah, they may have been better just to be quiet like those 7 days in advance.
Yes, yeah. Which I guess during this time, Job's kind of resigned himself to just waiting. Yeah. Just waiting.
He's almost wondering why death hasn't overtaken him.
Yes, I think so. Chapter 7 continues with Job's reply. Let me alone, my days have no meaning. Will you never look away from me or let me alone even for an instant? And then he says, if I have sinned, what have I done to you? Yeah. You who see everything we do. Which is interesting. He, in end of 21, therefore I will soon lie down in the dust. You will search for me, but I will be no more. And so I think he has a feeling at this point that death is coming.
Yeah, one thing interesting, God will speak later on, but during all of this, God is just silent. God's not responding.
He's not.
He's going to say something, but not at this point. I remember hearing a quote or a saying quite a while ago, is that the teacher is always quiet during the test. Ever heard that before?
Yes.
The teacher is always quiet during the test. And that's what Job is going through. He's being tested. Those words aren't used. I don't think those words are used, but
they're not. But you're right.
He's going through a test. Yep. He's going through a trial, and so sometimes God remains silent while we're going through these difficult times. And he'll speak at the right time. And maybe at this point Job isn't ready to hear. Maybe he's not ready to listen. He's not in a position to really absorb or understand what God wants to teach him through this. I really do believe, and you know, we know the rest of the story. We do. I really do believe that God is confident that Job is going to make it through this and is going to be better for it. And that's the beauty of the story. That Job is actually able to look back on this time. We'll get to the end later on, but so God is silent, but I don't think God is uncaring.
Absolutely.
I don't think God has just forgotten him.
No.
I think God is is still active, just waiting for his time to show up.
It is not God's time yet.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we struggle with a lot.
Yeah.
Is my timing versus God's timing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And God's timing is always right.
Yeah.
And mine is always a little bit selfish, I think.
Yeah.
And
I
so-
want an answer now. I want to know now.
Yes, yes. So chapter 8, Bildad replies to Job, basically tells him the same thing.
Yeah.
Verse 5 gives him the same advice, but if you will see God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. And I think Job has belief in that. I think he has a belief in that, but he doesn't know why it's happening or why it's taking so long, or and like you said, we do know the end of the story, and it's a great end, and God, there's a lot of revelation about God and God's responses.
In Job's reply to Bildad, it's almost as if Job is saying, Bildad kind of is encouraging him, make a case for yourself, talk to God and defend yourself.
Yes.
But then Job in his reply is almost saying, who am I to talk to God? Who am I to bring my dispute? Verse 14 of chapter 9.
Yes.
I circle that. How then can I dispute with him? How can I find words
right.
to argue with him?
That's
and,
right.
and so Job shows a very high regard for God, and he's humbled himself before God. What am I supposed to say? How can
Right.
how can I argue against the Creator?
Right, right, absolutely. Which is I think we understand that feeling and that logic there. Chapter 10, Job continues his reply to Bildad. Basically talking about the same things you were talking about. I think he starts. His reply to Bildad kind of starts his conversation with God.
Yeah, I didn't know where that break was. It seems like he redirects his
Right.
his talking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in verse 8 and 9.
Right, your handshake be.
Yes.
be, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Will you now turn and destroy me?
Yeah.
Remember that you molded me like clay. Will you now turn me to dust again?
Yeah.
And then at verse 18, why then did you bring me out of the womb? I wish I had died before an eye even saw me.
Yeah, this guy's down.
Yeah. In chapter 11, we have Zophar's first reply to Job.
Friend number 3. Yeah.
And verse 6, he says, know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin, which is an interesting response there. But basically, Zophar says God can do as he pleases, which is certainly true. Confess your sins and be forgiven. That same, they all three kind of go through the same assumption of that sin is causing this. So, and
So they're all operating on that premise that evil things happen because we're disobedient to God.
Right.
And that's not totally untrue. I mean, we can see, that's a covenant that God made with Israel. You obey me and I'll bless you, but if you don't, then bad things are going to happen.
Yes.
And so some of the evil that we experience in this world can be attributed to the fact that we've been disobedient to God, and God is disciplining us. The book of Hebrews talks about that.
Absolutely.
But the book of Job lets us know it's not that simple.
Right.
There are other factors, there are other realities that need to be taken into consideration.
Yes.
And there's not always this direct correlation between my behavior and how God blesses or doesn't bless me.
Absolutely.
So, there's some truth in what they say. It's just that Job brings us to this situation where we can't reduce the problem of evil and suffering to that one simple answer.
That's right. Very, very well said. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. That's it for Job
That's
today.
it for Job. All right, so we'll continue in that
continue.
with Job next week. All right, so
Yes,
let's
sir.
go ahead for the New Testament and back in 1 Corinthians, and we are in chapter 11.
Chapter 11.
And there are some things you can really dive deep into here that we won't have time to, but
Absolutely.
let's just cover the major points that Paul is making as he continues to address this, what we might call a dysfunctional church. There's obviously a lot of things that are going on, and he's going to address a lot of things regarding worship, and worship which is supposed to be an edifying experience, is kind of turned into a one-upsmanship, or who's better than who,
That's right.
and how radical can I be, and how can I show off what I can do, and even the Lord's Supper is addressed in this section, where they've taken this precious meal, this commemoration of the death of Christ, and they've turned it into a competition between people, and another bit of evidence of the disunity that's in Corinth. So.
Well, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about last week, in that their focus is on themselves and not on my brother or my sister.
Exactly.
And so.
Yeah. And then, of course, right in the middle of this is that great chapter, 1 Corinthians 13.
Yes, sir.
Chapter.
The love
So I'm sure during this discussion you'll also answer all the questions of women's role in worship. Is that what we should expect here?
Not from me. You're not going to expect that. No, sir.
All right, but this
I was
is
hoping you would.
No, this is one of the passages that you'd have to take into consideration as you form those ideas and thoughts, and how the church operates. So.
Yes.
All right, so that's kind of like a broad overview of what's happening there in most of those chapters. And of course, chapter 15 is a great chapter on the resurrection,
yes,
which is definitely a go-to passage whenever you're studying the resurrection. So, all right, chapter 11.
Yep, chapter 11, verse 3. But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. I think it's just back to Christ. That's Paul's. I think throughout Corinthians, Paul's always pointing back to Christ, because they seem to be pointing elsewhere. So verse 11, nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. Everything comes from God. 17 and 18 are I think Paul was a little, what's the word? He was upset with him for sure. Yeah. In the following directives, I have no praise for you. For your meetings do more harm than good.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing.
No, that's not good. Yeah. We're getting together in church, and we're even messed up more than we were before we came to church.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right. That's right. It says there are divisions among you. Then he goes into the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
And, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Right. Well, that's never a good thing.
No.
Never a good thing. End of verse 22, he says, shall I praise you? Certainly not in this matter. Certainly not. And so, then Paul goes through a passage that we read a lot of times for the Lord's Supper on Jesus. On the night he was betrayed, took the bread that was his body and the cup that was his blood, and the new covenant. Yeah. The new covenant. Verses 27 through 29. So then whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. Everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. For those who eat and drink without discerning the body of Christ eat and drink judgment on themselves. And that's talking about focus. Talking about where's our focus? Where's our where are we when we're doing that? If we have a dispute with a brother, go and settle it. Go and take care of it. Verse 33, so then my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, you should all eat together. Yeah. And that comes to, the divisions and doing the different things. And that's about all I had for 11, I think. 12 talks about gifts of the Spirit. Yep. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone it is the same God at work. Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. Goes back to that. Focus is not on me. Focus is on my brothers and sisters. Focus is outward. Focus is on my neighbor, loving my neighbor. 12 through 14, just as a body, though one has many parts, but all of its many parts form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jew or Gentile, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of the one part, but of many. And I really like how Paul goes through this, talking about the parts of the body. 20, as it is, there are many parts, but one body. So there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And that's what we have to, us today, that's what we have to remember and know as we come into the body.
Yeah, the connectedness that exists. It's not about me, it's not about you. We work together.
That's right.
And then he's also going to get into the issue, I think, in chapter 14 about how, no one gift is more important than another. And that really seems to be the situation in Corinth, where people are lording their gift over others.
Yes.
And it seems as if in Corinth the gift of tongues has taken preeminence, where that elevates someone over everyone else, and people are looking down on one another rather than realizing that we're working together. That every person is important, just like every part of the body serves a function.
That's right.
And without even the smallest parts, the body is going to suffer.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yep.
Very good. Very well said. Chapter 13, the love chapter. Mm-hmm. I wrote a synopsis and I thought, nah, that's not good. So I felt like it's best just to let God speak.
All right.
So verses 1 through 8. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In studying this, kind of how the way that we have, that is a direct statement to chapter 12.
Right.
He's telling them, look, guys, this is how it is, and you're not doing it.
Yeah.
And then he tells about what love really is,
Right.
and which is, there's so much there.
Yeah.
So much there.
Certainly one of the most beautiful passages in Scripture, and even non-believers, non-Christians are probably familiar with this reading because it is such an eloquent description of what really matters and what is really important.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a recording of Johnny Cash reading this.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's very his voice kind of rings in my head.
I
but
bet.
it's pretty interesting. But
Have you ever heard someone say that whenever you see the word love, to replace your name and use that as a challenge? Todd is patient, Todd is kind, Todd does not envy, does not boast. That's a real good way to look at this and to see how much you're embracing this agape love that Christ speaks about, the greatest commandment, and
absolutely,
which is really the solution to all of their problems.
It certainly is.
It'll make everything go away if they were to embrace and practice this type of love.
It sure does. Absolutely. Yeah. The last part of 5 there. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's not our human side.
No.
At all.
No.
So. And then verse 13, and now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Yep.
And that's maybe one of Paul's greatest chapters.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, when you put a list of greatest chapters in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13 and 15 probably show up on that list.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So as you alluded to, chapter 14, Paul's talking about spiritual gifts again, and I think you're exactly right that speaking in tongues had become a problem in Corinth. Paul talks about how prophesying is better, teaching is better. And he says in verse 3, the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. And verse 5, I would rather have you prophesy.
And really, the perspective on gifts is all of these are to benefit the church, to be a witness to unbelievers, and not to make you look good or for your own glory.
That's right. That's right. Back to chapter 13?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Love does not boast.
Yes. And in fact, in verse 12, since you are eager for gifts of the Spirit, try to excel in those that build up the church.
Yeah.
That's the intention. In the end of that chapter, I think he's talking about basically worship assemblies must be carried out in an orderly manner. He's talking about, verse 40, everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. Back to 33, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people.
Right.
Peace, that goes, you got to have that love for that peace.
Yep.
Yes, sir. And we'll skip over that woman thing there. Chapter 15, the resurrection chapter. Paul reminds them of the gospel that was preached to them.
Yeah, one thing he says in verse 3 of first importance,
Yes.
which I think alerts us to the fact that there are some things that are more critical, more core to who we are as Christians than some other peripheral matters. And I think that takes a lot of wisdom to know, what are the matters of first importance and what are the matters of secondary or tertiary importance. But just by using that term, he says, this is right at the center. This is right at the core. This is really something that defines who we are. And the resurrection. Without the resurrection, he says, our faith is in vain. Our preaching is useless.
Yes.
I mean, we're the most foolish of all people if we preach this gospel without a resurrection.
Verse 19, a people most to be pitied.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing, it's a miracle. It's beyond rational belief for sure. But as Christians, I think we can never let go of that reality, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And, admit it, it blows your mind. It's hard to really grasp that rationally, but that is really, Paul's saying you can't have Christianity without an Easter. You can't have Christianity without the resurrection. So he gives some evidences too that he appeared to these people, and he gives some lists of individual names, and he appeared to a group of 500 or more, some of whom are still living. And so he's actually challenging these readers. Hey, you can go check out and find some of these people that saw the resurrected Christ. If you want, if you want some eyewitnesses, you can go out there and find them.
That's right. That's right. Very good. Verse 22, for as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. And without the resurrection, that just wouldn't happen.
Right.
And so, absolutely. And the verses 3 through 8 of that chapter, that first importance, I appreciate you saying that. I very much agree. And, then it gives a list of that and, talks about some of the 500 that he appeared to and, just the proof that he conquered death.
Right.
That death has no hold on him.
All right.
That's it.
That wraps up our reading for this week.
Yes.
And again, continue in that. We'll continue in Job. We still have the whole week will be, looks like, dedicated to the reading of Job. And then we'll finish up 1 Corinthians, get to 2 Corinthians.
That's right.
Next week. So
Yes, sir. Very good.
good stuff.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff.
You
And
guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you Sunday.
all right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you, Blake. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Todd.